Chapter 9. When Dan heard that Malou had left the room, he began to take stock of the situation. He didn't want to think of anything while Malou was sitting beside him, for fear that she might hear his thoughts and interpret them the wrong way. Dan knew that something was definitely wrong with his motor skills. He wanted to speak. It was as if his jaws were preventing his mouth from opening. He wanted to open his eyes, but as hard as he tried, he couldn't do it. As for the rest of his body, he had felt the burning sensation of his leg when Damianos had touched it, but for the life of him he could not move a limb or even a finger. Was he to become a paraplegic or a burden to his family? A dire prospect indeed, and then there was the fact that now the nurses had wrapped his ribcage, which had hurt like hell when they did, and he couldn't scream or express what he felt. The only saving grace was that he could communicate with Malou when she touched her amulet. Since time seemed to pass at an interminable rate, Dan travelled through the maze of his recollection of the accident and what happened before he hit the darn slope. Did he really lose his amulet during his descent to hell? Skipping to find an answer to that question, his mind fast-forwarded to Damianos' visit and the conversation he had with Malou. Why did he say that he cared so much about me when in fact I know he is that demonic figure of ancient Greece who subdues his captors into submission? Dan surmised that perhaps the cat was only an emissary, a messenger sent to his bedside to lure him into misdeeds. Then he recalled the words of the old Indian. You must not lose your dream catcher, and if you come back without it, very bad things will happen to you and your family. If Dan could have moved, he would have mustered all of the courage he could find and his aching body, gotten out of this darn room with Malou and returned to the drugstore at this very minute. He knew Damianos was a bad omen, a portent of terrible things to happen, but he could not fight. He could not even move. As soon as Malou returned to the room, a few minutes after the nurses had bandaged Dan's torso, she stood by his bed and brought his hand to her mouth to kiss it. As she did, Dan's hand brushed against her amulet. It felt warm to him. When she then clasped his hand against her breasts, Malou heard him say, "Keep my hand on it, please." She was stunned. She should have thought of this before now. She scolded herself. Our protection is to share the power of my dream catcher. Oh, if only you didn't lose it. We would have gone back yesterday, Malou said to Dan. He wanted to smile at her gentle berating, and once again, he could not move. But that's when he told her, I don't know why, but I feel things, but I can't move, honey. I want to talk, but I can't. I want to open my eyes, but I can't. I am no longer in a coma, Malou. Please tell Dr. Sanders, he begged. How is it possible that you feel things, sweetheart, but you can't move? Malou asked quietly. Remember when Damianos touched my leg the first time he was here? Yes, of course. You told me you felt the burning. Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I don't know what I'm doing or thinking since you've been in this bed. She kissed his hand again. No matter, hun. But now you need to find Dr. Sanders before he transfers me to the clinic so the neuro-specialists over there will know what to do. But sweetheart, we can't stay. We have to go back to Bahoki, don't you see? The old Indian only gave us 3 days and tomorrow at midnight will be the end of the 3rd day. I know, Malou, but how are you going to bring me back to the drugstore, let alone get me out of here without anyone seeing us? What about if I sign discharge papers and I get you out with Heath and Dante's help? No, honey. They can't know anything about this. Even if you wanted to have me discharged, they won't let you do it. What do you mean they won't let me do it? Malou retorted, her voice rising with every syllable. I am your wife, and I can do whatever I want with you as far as I know, unless of course you have some other woman stashed somewhere who's looking after your interest. Do you? If he could have opened his mouth, Dan would have exploded in roaring laughter. Malou's blood was obviously reaching boiling point. No, Malou, I have no one else stashed away someplace. I only have you and the children, and if you have me discharged right now, I will not have the benefit of the neurosurgeon's examination in the clinic, now will I? Besides, he might be able to get me out of this inert state. Isn't it worth a shot? Sure, sweetheart. But we don't have time. Right now, in half an hour, to be exact, Dr. Sanders will release you in the hands of paramedics who will get you in the ambulance and drive you to the clinic. This is the only opportunity I have to see you out of the hospital. I know you'll do your best, Malou, because you're as sharp as a pin. Let me get Dr. Sanders, then, Malou said, putting Dan's hand back on the bed. Dan wanted to tell her not to leave, but he knew his words wouldn't reach her in time. She was already out of the room. Mere seconds after Malou left Damianos appeared beside Dan's bed. Mr. Politano, he said with a condescension of the feline he was. How does it feel to be unable to move or speak? Most comfortable, I should imagine. Everyone is attending to your every need, and you don't have to lift a finger, literally. Marvellous, isn't it? He sniggered. And I heard you're going to the clinic. A very good idea, if I do say so myself. He sat in the chair and placed his cane between his legs. Why would that be a good idea, you ask? Well, let me tell you. You won't have any visitors for one thing, except for Mrs. Politano, who will be allowed to sit at your bedside for an hour every day. And since you've lost your dream catcher, you'll be at my disposal to do with me whatever needs to be done while you're here, he chortled. Dan thought he would scream if he could. He knew that Damianos had him in his power already, and since he couldn't fight, he would be at his mercy for days and weeks to come. But for anything to happen, Damianos went on, we have to deal with your bones first, and that is something I cannot do. You see, only time is the all-powerful healer in this case, and I have to accept that. Yet, as I told your dear wife, I am very patient and discreet, which is always an asset in circumstances such as these. Since Dan knew the man would probably hear him, he said, And what would you have me do once I am healed, Damianos? Ah, very good question. I was thinking you could perhaps return to Pahoki with your wife, just for a quick visit to see how the place looked in 2000. I have always wanted to destroy these stupid paintings. They're only doors to hell or bliss, depending on what you do with the dream catchers, and you wouldn't believe the number of people who have fallen into that trap, such as you did, and have found themselves in heaps of trouble trying to redress the errors they had committed in the past. But I didn't want to redress any errors. I just went skiing, Dan argued. Precisely my point, Mr. Politano. On that day, instead of spending time with your children and your lovely wife, you did what you always did, take off to satisfy your own desires. Are you saying this is my punishment? Dan asked, realizing that perhaps God had wanted for him to stop being so stubborn and see that being successful in business wasn't all that life had to offer him. Maybe it was, Dan Politano, but that's none of my concern now. What's important, however, is the fact that as your tamer, your guide, if you prefer, there are pursuits which you and I have to follow. But what if I return with my wife and without my dream catcher? What will you do then? Dan asked, interrupting the cat in his explanation. I wouldn't advise it, Mr. Politano. You see, once you return to 2013 without your dream catcher, all of the bad deeds of the past will be able to follow you, and all of those that you have yet to accomplish will come to pass in your future. You are a barren desert, Mr. Politano, and the only oasis in sight is me. Don't forget it. The tyres of the car screeching to a halt in the spot that he had found near the hospital's entrance, Heath practically jumped out of the vehicle, locked the doors, and ran through the sliding doors like a crazed idiot on a mission. He looked up at the directory beside the elevators and then remembered that everyone had gone to the third floor when they were there on the weekend. As soon as the first elevator came to a stop and its doors opened, Heath squeezed past the people coming out of it and pressed 3, already looking up at the numbers that would light up above the doors when the elevator would be on its way up. He had the amulet in his pocket and kept his hands on it all the way until he reached the corridor leading to Dan's room. Slightly out of breath, he looked over the counter at the nurse's station and asked, Would you tell me if Mr. Politano has been transferred yet? Natalie looked up from the computer screen and smiled. Not yet, sir. But may I ask if you're family? Because only family members are allowed in before visiting hours. Sure am, Heath answered. I'm his cousin. Is it okay to go in now? Yes, it's okay, Natalie said to Heath's back when she saw him stop dead in his tracks in front of the door. Where's Mrs. Politano? Heath asked, not even turning around. And who's this guy with my cousin? He pointed to Dan's bed through the room's window. He's certainly no family. By the time Heath had turned his back to look at Natalie, she had risen from her seat. The little man had gone from sight. What do you mean, sir? Natalie asked. There's no one in the room. But there is, Heath insisted, turning his face to look through the window. There was someone, he blurted when he saw nothing but Dan lying immobile in his bed. Let me see, Natalie replied, rounding the counter to join Heath and entering the room with him. After looking around and even opening the closet, she said, There is no one here, as you can see. I'm sorry. Maybe it was a reflection of somebody in the window that you saw. I guess it must have been, Heath agreed, thinking it was probably his imagination having playing tricks on him. Anyway, thank you, Miss Nurse Pina, Natalie replied, a smile crossing her gentle lips. And you are Heath's daughter, Dan's cousin. Pleased to meet you. Same here, Natalie said, gazing at Heath appreciatively. But when she noticed that he was still looking around him, she added, And don't worry, Mrs. Politano will be back in a minute. She's just in the ladies' room. He sat down, took the amulet out of his pocket and looked at it. The delicate wood carving and filigree surrounding the hole in the centre of it was intriguing, to say the least. He was still admiring it and turning it over in his hand when he heard the door of the room open and Malou saying, My goodness, Heath, what are you doing here? She was quite surprised to see him and immediately wondered if anything was wrong with the children. Is everything okay? Has anything happened? No, everything is fine, Malou, don't worry, but I just found Dan's amulet when I was cleaning the car. Heath stood up and handed the dream catcher to Malou. Oh my God, this is wonderful, Heath. Just marvellous, she said, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing his cheeks. Let me put it around his neck. Malou stopped, suddenly realising that the leather strap was no longer holding the amulet. But where's the strap? She looked up at Heath, a flutter of desperation in her voice. Heath shook his head. Sorry, but that's all I found. The strap must have been ripped off when it was caught between the seat and the armrest, he explained. Malou looked at the dreamcatcher and then at Dan. Never mind, she said. Give me your shoelaces, to Heath's utmost surprise. He looked down at his runners and then, suddenly understanding what Malou meant to do, he bent down and took out the laces off one shoe. Here you go, he said, handing it to her. Within minutes Dan had his amulet around his neck. Everything will be fine now, he thought. Little did he know that the next 30 hours would be as nightmarish as he would never have imagined possible.